TorahCafe.com.
How do we know when a religion's claims are credible and when they're not credible? When you approach any religion on the planet, you ask them, what have you got? Every religion will present to you some sort of benefit that you'll get if you join their religion. If you become a Christian, you will be saved in the next world. If you become a Buddhist, you will achieve the 8th stage of transic insight. You could become a sort of divinity. If you become a Hindu, you'll gain control over nature. If you ask these religions, tell me something. If instead of joining your religion, I joined that religion over there, will I get the benefits of your religion? They'll say no. Every religion's claims are exclusive. That is, if you join our religion, you get the benefits of our religion. If not, then you don't. And when a religion makes this claim to exclusivity, they step onto a credibility trapdoor. You say to them, tell me something. You're the only one who can tell me how to be saved. You're the only one who can tell me how to get to the 8th stage of transic insight. You're the only one who can tell me how to gain control over nature. That means the technology that you're offering me must not be patently obvious. If everybody could see it, then everybody would know you have to accept Jesus to be saved. So if it's not patently obvious, if not everybody in the world has realized it, then where did you get this information? Every religion will reveal to you something which I call the revelation narrative, the story of how that religion came to possess its secrets. And when I was doing my undergraduate work, I compared revelation narratives and discovered that in 165 major religious families, every single religion without exception has the exact same pattern in their revelation narrative. The pattern's fairly obvious. How does Christianity start? By an Orthodox Jew by the name of Shaul, who was walking alone on the road to Damascus, 35 years after Jesus died, when suddenly there appeared in front of him none other than Jesus, nice to meet you. He tells all the miracle stories of his life, goes back into the city, starts telling people about his experience, writes down the story of Jesus' life, including all the miracles, then writes more than half of the books of the New Testament put together, and the New Testament is born, as is modern Christianity. If Paul told the truth about his experience with Jesus, the whole thing is true. If Paul lied or hallucinated or imagined or exaggerated, then the whole thing is not true. It turns out the credibility of all of Christianity rides on the credibility of one man, Paul. The credibility of Islam rests entirely on the credibility of one man, Muhammad. The same is true about every religion on the planet, you name it. Siddhartha Gautama, who launched Buddhism, who alone ascended to the 8th stage of transic insight, came to know all there is to be known, descended back into his body while no one was present. The Mormons were founded by Joseph Smith Jr. Now, I am not telling you that any of these religions are not true. It's entirely possible one of them or all of them could be true. What I am telling you is that from an academic perspective, the credibility level is 0. Because it's always based on the word of one or two people. Judaism starts like every other religion on the planet. You open up the Torah and it says, God spoke to one man, Abraham. A generation later, he speaks to, coincidentally, Abraham's son, Isaac. One generation later, Jacob. Do you see how suspicious this is? Now, of course, if you mention this to an Orthodox Jew, immediately the Orthodox Jew will object and say, no, you're reading the wrong part of the book. Flip to the second book, the book of Exodus, where there you see a story about how 3 million people escape Egypt, they make it to Mount Sinai, and there God appears and he speaks to 3 million people. Now that is impressive. 3 million people, what are the odds that 3 million people would have all conspired, told a lie about a mass revelation, and no one in that entire generation would have confessed and said, we made it all up? And if you try this in a university classroom, they will ask the most obvious question on the planet. Well, who wrote the Torah? And at that point, the credibility of Judaism is reduced to absolutely 0. We are just like every other religion on the planet. One person told a story. And that story was bought hook, line, and sinker. We must be empiricists. We must link ourselves to the physical realities, to the evidence. What is in fact true? What do we know for sure is true? One thing we know for sure is true. There's a book, tells a story about 3 million people hearing God speak. That means at some point, some charismatic cult leader or group of leaders must have told somebody that this event happened, this mass revelation. When the charismatic cult leader first introduced to the world this event of Sinai, 3 million people hearing God say, I'm the Lord your God, you should know other gods before me, where did the charismatic cult leader place this event in history? In other words, let's go back to the moment where the charismatic cult leader will persuade the wild-eyed charismatic cult followers that the whole thing is true. How did it happen? So there's only 3 possibilities. There's the past theory, the present theory, and the future theory. When Judaism was originally launched, it had to have been launched with one of these 3 lies, and there is no other possibility. Start with the simplest. The simplest is the present. And the present lie, a charismatic cult leader comes to you and says to you, you all heard God speak. You heard him say these words, I'm the Lord your God, you should have no other gods before me. Moshe, come up to the mountain. I went up on the mountain, I got the Torah, I brought it down, and I've here to give it to you. I hand you the book. And you are so moved by my charisma, and the religion is up and running. Possibility number 2, past theory, slightly more complex. In past theory, the charismatic cult leader comes to a group of people and he says to them, you heard nothing, for God never spoke to you. It was long ago at the foot of a great mountain. All of your ancestors were there. There was a great prophet Moses. God descended on the mountain. He said, I'm the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Moshe, come up to the mountain. Moses went up. He received the Torah. He brought it down. He gave it to all of your ancestors. They were there. They became religious Jews. They kept the law carefully for generation after generation. For 2 or 3 generations. Then there was a terrible, now insert whatever you want, flood, disease, war. And the entire Jewish nation fumbled the tradition. It was lost. And no one in your family has known anything about Mount Sinai until now, when I, Fred, came back to tell you about the Sinai event. By the way, one subtle point. If I tell you your parents all received the tradition from their parents, my lie is obvious and my credibility drops to 0 instantly. No one's going to follow me. Therefore, in order to protect my credibility, I must tell you the tradition was lost, and that's why your mother knows nothing about it. Don't bother asking. Is that clear? Present theory, past theory. There is one other possibility, which is future theory, which I include just for completeness sake. In future theory, the charismatic cult leader comes to a group of people and he says to them, you heard nothing, because God never spoke to you, and God never spoke to your ancestors. But someday, there'll be a great mountain Sinai. Generations from now, there'll be a great prophetic leader, Moses. God will descend on that mountain. He'll tell all of your descendants, I'm the Lord your God. You should have no other gods before me. Moshe, come up on the mountain. Moses will go up. He'll get the Torah. He'll bring it down. He'll give it to your descendants. Now, note the power of the structure that I've created. Every copy of the Torah on the planet says that God spoke to 3 million people. The charismatic cult leader who introduced that to the Jewish nation had to tell those people when the event took place. He either had to say, God spoke in the past to a past generation, he spoke in the present to you, or he will speak in the future to a future generation. Do you see there is no other possibility? Now, the power of this model is, what happens if I would show you that the future theory could never have produced Judaism as we know it today? It would never have worked. Then you and I would know that Judaism was originally launched with the present or the past. But what would happen if I showed you that not only the future theory could never produce Judaism as we know it today, but the present theory also could never have produced Judaism? It wouldn't have worked. Then you and I would know that the lie called Judaism was produced, in fact, by the past theory. That's the genesis of Judaism. That's how it happened. But what happens if I show you that the past theory could never have generated Judaism? That lie would never have been able to produce what we see today. If the past lie, the present lie, and the future lie could never have worked, that would lead us to a 4th conclusion, which is that Judaism is true. Let's give it a try. There are a group of people on the planet today called Orthodox Jews. They believe with all their heart and soul that God spoke to their ancestors at Mount Sinai. I know they exist. I've met them. They're out there. Now, this is not the first generation of Orthodox Jews. I know, because I hang out at the Israel Museum and I look at fragments from 500 years ago and 1,000 years ago and 1,500 years ago and 2,000 years ago. Fact. Nobody on the planet argues. There have been at least 2,000 years of this chain of tradition passing through history. The whole debate is, what's at the top of that chain? Is that a charismatic cult leader or someone else? Watch. Charismatic cult leader persuades a group of people. None of you heard God speak, and none of your ancestors heard God speak. And the reason is 5 words. God has not yet spoken. If I persuade you that God has not yet spoken, and you believe that with all your heart and soul, someday he'll speak, but God has not yet spoken, what do you tell your kids? God hasn't spoken. And they'll tell their kids, God hasn't spoken. And you'll end up with generation after generation saying, God hasn't spoken. Is that the sociological phenomenon we're looking at? No. That means the future lie is not the story that was told which generated Judaism as we know it today. Now, I admit, someone might at some point in history have told a future lie, but at some point that had to segue into either the present or the past in order to generate the Orthodox Jews that we've seen for the last 2,000 years. Is that clear? The future lie does not work. 1 down, 2 to go. Present lie. One of the tools that we use when we study religions today is called Applewhite theorem. It's named after a charismatic cult leader by the name of Marshall Applewhite. A fundamental principle about human psychology. We are believers essentially. We are pre-programmed for religion. As long as the lie cannot be checked. And therefore, every religion on the planet is launched with a lie that can't be checked. Hi, my name is Paul. I just came back from the road to Damascus where I was alone and I met Jesus. No one else was there. Can you check that? The problem with present theory is in present theory, the charismatic cult leader comes to you and he says to you, you all just heard God speak. If I would tell you that your mother heard God speak, you could check that. If I would tell you your grandmother heard God speak, you would ask her. But I'm telling you the most checkable lie. You all heard God speak. There is no normal human being on the planet under any circumstances that would believe they just heard God say these words. I am the Lord thy God. You shall have no other gods before me. Moshe, Moshe, come up to the mountain. That's why, although I lecture on university campuses all across the world, I've never, in 25 years of giving this lecture, I've never met one PhD at any university who is teaching present lie. At every major university in the world today, they're teaching that the Torah is written by man, not by God. And what they teach is past theory. And past theory is really very powerful. A charismatic cult leader made up a whole history. He made up a story that there was once a charismatic leader by the name of Moses, and once upon a time the Jews arrived at Mount Sinai. And there they all accepted the Torah and the whole thing was up and running. But then it was lost. And for generations no one knew about it. Until this charismatic cult leader relaunched the religion. It's a very powerful theory, and there's one small problem with it, and that's this. I ran an experiment several years ago. I went to a great sage in Jerusalem. He passed away now, but his name was Rabbi Shlomo Volba, and I asked him, the Torah that you're teaching all these thousands of people, where did you get it? He said, I got it from my teacher. What was his name? Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz of Mir. I checked. I found 4 independent literary sources confirming a teacher-student relationship. I got birth dates and death dates. I went back to him. Your teacher's teacher, who was that? Where did Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz get this whole story? And he said he got it from his teacher, Reb Simcha Zissel Ziv of Kelemen. I checked. 4 independent sources, birth dates, death dates. Where did Reb Simcha Zissel Ziv get it? He got it from Rav Yisrael Salant, or Rav Israel of Salant. Birth dates, death dates, 4 independent literary sources. And Israel Salanter from Rav Zundel of Salant. And Rav Zundel of Salant from Rav Chaim of Volozhin. Rav Chaim Volozhin from the Vilna Gaon. And the Vilna Gaon, and I played this game going backwards. It took me 2.5 years to run the experiment. After 2.5 years, I had assembled 4 independent literary sources for every post-biblical name in the chain. You can find it on the web. It's very famous now. I established a train of tradition that goes from me back to Moses at Mount Sinai. It's 60-some generations. Now, I'm not telling you anything on that sheet is true. I'm telling you something far more powerful. I have all those books on my shelves. And what I'm telling you is, that chain is what Jews believe. That's what they claim. What's the problem? They're claiming that there is a continuous, unbroken chain from today going straight back to Sinai. Why is that problematic? Go back to past theory. In past theory, charismatic cult leader comes to you and says, There was Moses, there was a gap, and there was Fred, MGF. If I persuade all of you, Moses, gap, Fred, MGF, what do you tell your kids? MGF. What do they tell their kids? MGF. And you have generation after generation talking about Moses, then a gap, and then Fred. And yet, when we start looking at Jewish communities and their histories, we find no record ever of a significant gap in Jewish history. A period where people couldn't ask their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents and hear about the word Sinai. It's a continuous line. Where is the gap in Jewish history? And even worse, where's Fred? 24 books of the Bible, in 60 volumes of the Talmud, in dozens of volumes of Medrash, there is not a single word about the greatest crisis ever in Jewish history, a crisis where for generations the Jews knew nothing about Sinai. After the Holocaust, everyone who walked out of the Holocaust knew about the word Sinai. They either believed it or they denied it. But everyone knew about Sinai. This is a crisis of such proportions that nobody knew about it. How could that be? And how could that crisis not be recorded in Jewish history? And how could the leader who restarted Judaism be unknown? Past, present, and future could not have launched Judaism. That means Judaism must be true. God must have spoken to the Jews at Mount Sinai. Go to the last part, part 4. Very quickly. Every single person in this room believes natural things happen more than once. If it is normal and natural to be able to launch a mythology about mass revelation, it should happen again. And yet, in 5,000 years of comprehensive religious histories, we do not have a single nation, a single group of 100 people who all claim they heard God speak and lived to talk about it. There's no such thing in human history. It doesn't exist. So someone will say, you know how it happened? It's very easy. It was, they left Egypt. How much food could they have carried with them? So after a couple weeks, they were starving. And they came into a field filled with mushrooms, and they started eating these things. It was a mass drug trip, yeah? Or it was mass hysteria. They were terrified by a thunderstorm. Or it was an evolving mythology that happened over thousands of years. Whatever rational explanation you'll give me, the more probable you make your explanation, the more you say that could easily happen, then the more powerful my question becomes. If it could easily happen, why didn't it ever happen again? Natural things happen more than once. Is it natural for a group of people to make up a story about God coming down in the form of a human being? I know it's possible naturally to get away with that story. How do I know? It happens dozens of times in human history. Whatever lie can be told has been told, except for one, which is the most obvious and most basic lie. God spoke to a group of people. Why hasn't everyone ever come up with that again? No one ever thought of it? It's too complicated? God spoke to 5 people, never thought of that one. What's going on? Why is that? And if you'll tell me, well, it could happen, but it's extremely unlikely, extremely unlikely. It's so unlikely it doesn't happen more than once every 5 or 6 or 7,000 years. And therefore, even though there was a story about mass revelation 6, 7, 8, 10,000 years ago, but I have no way of seeing it because I can't see that far back in history. If you'll tell me that, I'll say to you, yeah, you really believe that? Let me ask you something. I get up in front of you and I take a pair of dice and I tell you I'm the luckiest guy you ever met. I'm going to throw double sixes on the first throw. And I throw a pair of double sixes. So what are the odds I just got lucky? It's 1 in 36. What are the odds the dice are loaded? 35 and 36. Which do you believe? I do better. I pick up the dice. I throw 10 double sixes in a row. So now, let's say it's extremely unlikely that someone would get away with a story about mass revelation, and it's extremely unlikely someone would throw 10 double sixes in a row. Let's say that the odds are the same. Now, I show you a video, 10 double sixes in a row. And I tell you, there's a 0.00000000000000001% chance that he just got lucky. And there's a 99.999999999999999% chance those dice are loaded. What do you believe? If you're calm and rational, it's very obvious. Now just switch to the other side of the chart. I show you a picture of a group of people traveling down through history who believed in mass revelation. which you said it's so unlikely no one would ever get away with that except for once every 5,000 or 6,000 years, just like the dice. You know what the chances are this happened naturally? 0.00000000000000001% chance. And there's a 99.9999999999999% chance this was not a natural event. Put aside all emotional biases and tell me what you think is rational. For me, that presented an awesome intellectual challenge. My hands started to shake when I realized. And it made me realize the challenge of this world is not finding the truth. That's pretty obvious. The challenge is having the courage to live with integrity after you know it. Thank you.